The Horus Heresy is the founding myth of the Warhammer 40,000 setting, a time of civil war when half the Emperor's 18 legions of Space Marines turned traitor and made war on the Imperium. And the shock of that war changed them. Many of the legions had their cultures irrevocably altered by the events of the heresy, but some legions never changed, and for the Iron Warriors this was just another war. Hiya, welcome to Heresy 101. In this little series, I'm going to go through the lore for each of Warhammer's Space Marine legions, particularly their origin in the grim days of the Horus Heresy. I'll take a look at where they are at the start of the heresy and how they got there and what happens to them during it. Anyway, look, before I start, this video contains spoilers, obviously, for the Horus Heresy Black Books and Black Library novel series. At the end of the Great Crusade, as the Horus Heresy unfolded across the galaxy and plunged the Imperium into war, the 4th Legion, the Iron Warriors, had been campaigning unceasingly across the worst battlefields of the galaxy for nigh on 2 centuries. In that time, their methods and manner hardly changed at all. If anything, the discovery of their Primarch, Perturabo, just solidified and amplified it. Artillery, attrition, a bleak resignation to losses. When the heresy finally erupted, their bleak and bitter method of war turned out to be exactly what Horus needed. The history of the 4th Legion, like all the legions, starts during the Unification Wars on Terra in the 30th millennium. As the Emperor's armies conquered the fractured planet we know as Earth, with genetically engineered Thunder Warriors and unmodified human troops, the Emperor himself had started his next project, the Legiones Astartes. The Primarchs, the superhuman beings that were to lead these new armies and stabilize their genetic modifications, had been scattered across the galaxy in a great conspiracy. But the process of creating the Space Marines from their template had already begun. For some legions, this process was slow and painful. Without the Primarchs around to stabilize and develop the gene seed, creating new Astartes could be an unreliable process, with risks of gene seed blight. But for the 4th Legion, the opposite was the case. The genetic template from the 4th Primarch turned out to be exceptionally reliable, with an extremely low rejection rate, and the 4th grew much faster than its brother legions. Originally recruiting from the gun tribes of Sekamrak, the Legion quickly outgrew its original territory and started taking recruits from all over Terra, including recruits that had originally been bound to other legions. When a gene seed blight affected the 3rd Legion, slowing their ability to create new Astartes, the recruits were handed over to the 4th. Within a few years, the 4th Legion was fielding whole battalions where some of the others had barely 100 warriors, and they were quickly deployed to active service alongside the 1st Legion, the original template for all of them, and the 5th Legion, the scouts and outriders of the Emperor's armies. This growth also meant they got their lion's share of new technology. New weapons and war machines made available after the alliance with Mars went to the 4th to hastily supply their new recruits. And with those, the 4th fought in some of the key battles to conquer the solar system, including the war against the Litho-Golem armies of Venus. By the time the Great Crusade started, the 4th were one of the most numerous legions and were split across a number of the expeditionary fleets that made their way out into the dark. Columns of legionnaires advanced into the teeth of enemy fire on dozens of worlds, with new recruits being inducted constantly, and this rapid growth and high turnover had an interesting effect. At the start, all of the legions adhered to the same structure, codified as the Principia Bellicosa, but as the Great Crusade spread out from Terra, many of the legions adapted this, changing their structures and organizations to better fit their own preferred tactics, and as the Primarchs were found, reforming to suit the culture of the Primarch's homeworld. But lacking a Primarch and any specific infusion of a planet's culture, the Principia Bellicosa became the culture of the 4th Legion. As those rules encouraged, their victories were gained by meticulously applied force of arms and relentless direct assault. And while effective, they also became known as a mechanized, humorless, even unimaginative legion. But while the more glorious legions, led by their glorious Primarchs, disdained their methods, all of this was perfect for the 4th Legion's commanders, the High Command of the Great Crusade. They wanted unimaginative and reliable. They wanted a legion that would accept the dirty jobs, the attrition, the boring garrison duties, the constant splitting up into smaller and smaller units without complaint. and without some Primarch blocking their decisions. These were the campaigns to which the 4th Legion was assigned, the thankless sieges and protracted suppression campaigns that needed to be done but carried little renown. The 4th prosecuted their campaigns in the same way they always had, determined, disciplined, pragmatic, and calculated, making heavy use of all the technologies a legion had available. Artillery bombardment, armoured spearheads, and mechanized assaults. If any unique culture grew in the Legion at all, it was as a reaction to this sort of warfare, a bleak pride in their thankless work and a growing resentment towards those legions who the 4th saw as glory hunters. They didn't need such flashy tactics and cared nothing for knightly honour. They wanted to prove that they could win the same way they'd always won, by rationally applied force and willingness to keep going, whatever the cost. It was an effective tactic, but the cost in attrition was high, and while the 4th didn't care much for losses, it took its toll on the Legion's overall numbers and led to their use falling in the Middle Crusade. And while I'd like to say that they were redeemed by the discovery of their Primarch like so many other legions, the truth is most of this built-up resentment was only amplified. Perturabo had been found on the world of Olympia, a planet composed of numerous warring city-states. Adopted as a son by one of the local rulers, he proved a masterful tactician with a keen intellect, devouring any learning he could. His military mind made his state, Locos, the most powerful on the planet, but Perturabo was aware that he was being used, and after a number of assassination attempts, the young Primarch grew paranoid, cold, and insular. When the Imperium arrived, as Perturabo long suspected it would, he joined the Emperor and consumed everything he could about the Crusade and the Imperium, discarding the state of Locos and enthusiastically turning Olympia into an imperial world, a recruitment base for his new army. After a brief period with his father, he was given command of the 4th to run as he wished, and free from any restrictions of either imperial or Olympian culture, he started to remake them. Horrifying the Crusade High Command, his first edict was a simple one. The 4th had performed competently, but hadn't excelled, not to the standards Perturabo expected of his new sons. It wasn't enough that they were already superior. Their fault lay in that amongst the legions they were not already supreme. To teach them this lesson, he commanded decimation. 1 in 10 warriors of the Legion beaten to death by their own squad mates as a demonstration of what their Primarch expected. Death would be the price of failure in Perturabo's service. As the 4th Legion set out once again into the dark, all their tendencies before were encouraged by their brutal new master. Where once attrition was borne stoically, now it was barely a consideration, each war a mathematical calculation indifferent to the cost in human life. This new legion, the Iron Warriors, became the battering ram of the Great Crusade. An unyielding engine of war that swept all before it, with worlds scoured to feed the Legion's need for new warriors. Their reputation suffered, but Perturabo didn't care. His reaction to his brothers was either indifference or bristling, paranoid hostility, which only increased as other Primarchs started to criticize his methods, leading to occasional friction with the Raven Guard and Space Wolves, and a bitter rivalry with the Imperial Fists of Rogel Dawn. Without any allies amongst the legions, the Iron Warriors continued to be bled dry, their grim pride in doing the jobs nobody else would, leading to them being deployed all over the galaxy in smaller and smaller units, becoming more and more resentful of the Imperium. But towards the end of the Great Crusade, the Legion would suffer an even bigger wound to their pride as their own home planet, Olympia, cast aside by Perturabo, rebelled. On the authority of the Warmaster Horus, the Iron Warriors descended on their former home with a vengeance, destroying the walls Perturabo had built himself and enslaving the population. This subjugation of Olympia only increased the bitterness and paranoia and resentment present in the 4th Legion and their Primarch, a flaw that Horus would quickly exploit as the heresy unfolded. At the start of the heresy, the Iron Warriors were estimated to have an active strength of between 150 and 180,000 legionnaires, which put them in the high middle end of the Astartes legions, but we should bear in mind that this was after a number of brutal attrition campaigns, and that the Iron Warriors could easily have been much bigger during the Crusade. These warriors were organised into grand companies, each of which was roughly 1,000 marines, but with a massively inflated amount of armour and artillery compared to a normal legion formation, and with a much larger pool of initiates to replace their losses. The Iron Warriors were fans of any technique that would speed up Astartes production. Each individual warrior was expected to be proficient in any role. They were reassigned to different jobs and formations purely on the basis of numbers. Individual heroics or commendations meant little to them. Any identity they had was part of the greater whole, the overall war machine that could be applied to any theatre. But if there were any skills in particular they favoured, it was technological ability, abstract reasoning, and rapid data analysis. Paragons of these traits might become Warsmith, a title in the Legion that rose to replace the Praetor of the Principia, and who would usually have command of a grand battalion of their own. They did field some specialised units, like the Tyranthikos Siegebreakers in Terminator armour, or the formation known as the Stor Bezashk, who maintained the most destructive siege weapons in any of the legions. And they fielded a greater than normal amount of rare armour and weapon systems, but their preference was for the tried and tested. Mark III armour was still popular even after the rollout of more sophisticated marks, and dreadnoughts were very common. The intention was that the Iron Warriors were a machine of war, an integrated, disciplined, and aggressive force of calculated savagery, precisely calculated bombardments followed by perfectly choreographed armoured advances and unbreakable infantry support. As the heresy erupted, these methods would be first tested against their brother legions on Istvan V in the Urgal Depression. The Iron Warriors were assigned to the response force sent to counter Horus's betrayal, 7 loyal legions to stop the War Master's 4. The first wave, the Salamanders, Iron Hands, and Raven Guard, deployed against Horus's forces, but the second supporting wave, the Word Bearers, Alpha Legion, Night Lords, and Perturabo's Iron Warriors, had already been turned to the side of Horus. The Iron Warriors deployed behind the Loyalists, set their fortifications and emplacements, and as the Loyalist legions fell back to their positions, caught them in a crossfire, massacring a large part of the Loyalist force. After this, the Iron Warriors supported Horus's consolidation and then advance, turning Olympia and its surrounding worlds into a pocket empire. But they also took the opportunity to settle old scores. The Iron Warriors fell on the Imperial Fist fleet, becalmed on its way to Isfahan in the Battle of Fall, and assaulted their garrison stationed in the Cadmeian citadel on Hydra Caudatus. Perturabo accompanied Fulgrim on his quest into the Eye of Terror, where Fulgrim used his brother as a pawn to fuel his own transformation into a demon prince. But even through this second betrayal, the Iron Warriors stayed loyal to the War Master. They fought at Yarant and Vanaheim and conducted a massive armoured campaign on Talon, where their virus bombs turned the verdant world into a desert planet. The Iron Warriors were then linchpins of the siege at Terra, the War Master appointing Perturabo to command the siege, and the first stages played out as a battle between the fortifications of Rogel Dawn and the siegecraft of the Lord of Iron. In fact, the traitors initially massively outnumbered the Loyalists and forced them back into the inner palace as Rogel Dawn's walls were systematically torn down by the Iron Warriors. But eventually, having proven his point and with subordinate traitor commanders attempting to take the siege into their own hands, Perturabo quit Terra along with his forces. After the heresy, the Iron Warriors made their slow way into the Eye of Terror, but they took the time to taunt their old enemies once more, luring the Imperial Fists into a protracted conflict on Sebastus IV, known as the Iron Cage, which left so many Loyalists dead that Perturabo ascended to demonhood, and the Imperial Fists were left unable to fight for 19 years until they rebuilt their losses. Eventually, Perturabo took command of the demon world of Medrengard in the Eye of Terror, from where the Iron Warriors remained a threat to the Imperium all the way into the 41st millennium. And that's the 4th Legion. Their initial advantages, such as their pragmatism and ease of manufacture, left them open to exploitation by the nascent Imperium, and with no Primarch to fight their case, they turned bitter and resentful, something that would only increase when they were finally given over to the command of Perturabo. Thanks for watching. So if you'd like more info on maybe a jollier legion than that, there's a little box just here to the right, and if you'd like to support the channel or see these videos a bit early, there's a Patreon link in the description below. See ya!